This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-8444-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Persephone and Cassandra, Atlas and Prometheus, oligarchy, plutocracy, satire, irony, hubris, nemesis, pathos, catharsis, sour grapes and blowing hot and cold, opening Pandora's box and leaving no stone unturned, the myths, tales and concepts of ancient Greece echo and reach into every aspect of modern life. Often misunderstood, frequently romanticized, and sometimes deliberately twisted. To understand their origins and truth is to get a real glimpse into the universal themes that connect us to the past and to each other. This is their story.
Άμα θέλεις μάνα δίρε με, άμα θέλεις μάνα δίρε με, πάλι εγώ θα βγαίνω στην αυλή για να βλέπω τον Αλεξανδρή.
Welcome to Podyssey. I'm Alex Andreou. Each week we will take one myth, one concept, person, place or theme from ancient Greece, take it apart, figure out its inner workings, trace its influence, juice it for its wisdom, reimagine, update and put it back together all shiny and new. I have been overwhelmed by your response to the podcast and I wanted to express my gratitude. One puts these things together in a vacuum, especially solo passion projects like this, without any real expectation that people will listen, and if they listen, will get it. Just a hope that they will trust the thing enough to follow it down every rabbit warren and tangent, enjoy it, and not think it precious, preachy, or pretentious. Thousands of you have done just that. I am a little bit in love with each and every one of you. I will ask you to take a moment and click follow on whatever platform you are listening on. Do it now. It really encourages the algorithm to see Podyssey as hot and suggest it to others. And tell the world about Podyssey. I can't afford to advertise. You are my only billboard. Persephone is by far the most complex figure we have looked at so far, and her story is contentious and multifaceted. What you see is what you get, and not. Appropriately given the subject, there is one myth on the surface, an important one, a creation one, but a second one even more profound in the gloom underneath. Through both runs one theme, balance. Balance of power, balance between light and dark, balance between the natural and the unnatural, rules and transgressions, men and women, mothers and daughters, gods and mortals, life and death. So this will take 2 weeks. Hence Persephone 1. And we will do it Rashomon style. We will look at this whodunit and take testimony from the witnesses first, and next week from the woman at the centre of it all. Then I will gather everyone in the study and reveal what happened. Only I promise not to keep vital clues hidden from you until the very last chapter, like that cow, Agatha Christie. It was a day like any other. They were in a field gathering flowers, Persephone and her mates. She met up with the daughters of the ocean, like they did most days. "Mum, can I go?" she asked her mother Demeter, goddess of harvest and fertility. "With the girls?" Demeter checked. "Fine. Just don't wander off too far," she shouted after them, but they had already run away. Demeter smiled. Was she ever that age? The girls teased each other and giggled, loosened their belts and let the breeze flutter their tunics and cool their skin, surveyed their latest measurements. You really do grow every day when you're that age, both up and out. It was a day like any other, warm and bright and full of wild berries. They were in a field gathering flowers like they did most days. What is safer than that? What is more innocent than that? Just gathering flowers. Hyacinths and poppies, crocuses and irises, wild roses and violets. Maybe Persephone wandered a little too far from the group, but nature in spring, and it was always spring, is like the best wiki page. One interesting thing leads you to another. Click, click, click. Maybe she wandered a little too far. In all honesty, she was getting a little old for that group. They were only a year younger, but at that age the distance stretches out. She loved her girlfriends, but appreciated small doses of solitude just as much. It was just a day like any other. That's when Persephone caught a glimpse of them. No, not true. She caught a whiff of their scent first, then a glimpse of them. In a little meadow, growing next to a burbling spring, the most extraordinary clump of flowers, bone-white velvet petals with a bright orange crown in the middle glowing like lava. When I say growing next to spring, I don't mean had grown or growing as plants always do. I mean they were growing now, more and more of them, blooming like a time-lapse in a nature documentary, as if pushed out by Gaia herself just to entice her. She would later find out the plant was called Narcissus, and it had, in fact, been pushed out by Gaia just to entice her. The scent made her almost drunk. She entered the meadow and reached out with both hands to pick the blossoms. But the moment she touched one, the earth shook. A gaping chasm opened, as if she had pulled some flower lever to an invisible trapdoor. And out of it, an ebony chariot drawn by 6 grey horses. I do not mean smoky white, or gunmetal silver, or ash or charcoal grey, but grey as if all colour had been drained out of them by some invisible remote. And on the chariot stood the Dark Emperor, the ruler of the underworld, the receiver of souls, the host that welcomes all in the end. Lord Hades, jet-black locks glistening, jet-black eyes replacing light with antimatter, jet-black intentions as clear as they were inevitable. Snatched her by her waist and was gone as quickly as he appeared. The scream she let out seemed to disappear in the distance, somehow faster than sound can travel. It was almost the idea of a scream that never materialized. Nobody heard it, almost nobody. Not the daughters of the ocean, not the flowers, not the squirrels, not the finches, not the burbling spring, not the trees, not the rocks that just sat there, dumb and oblivious to the world-altering event they had just failed to witness. Nobody heard it. Almost nobody. Because there is one set of ears that is more finely tuned to any sound any person makes, even a gentle ouch when you step on a piece of Lego 5,000 miles away from her, even a wheeze, even a sigh, even the idea of a scream. It was on a day like any other that Demeter's only child disappeared. Demeter tore the headband off her head, the symbol of her divinity, covered herself in a black shawl, and let out a guttural roar that made everyone who heard it cower, and rightly so. For 9 days and nights she neither ate nor drank, nor washed her face or combed her hair, but flew all over the land, crisscrossing it like a harrier hawk, looking for prey, swooping every time she thought she saw some tiny clue. She stopped and asked every dryad and naiad, every faun and centaur, every spirit and deity, but nobody had seen or heard a thing. She started to believe that maybe she imagined Persephone's scream. Maybe she had run away and didn't want to be found. She was at that age. But on the dawn of the 10th day she came across Hecate, goddess of sorcery and night, of crossroads and thresholds, the only deity to have been given power by Zeus, Poseidon and Hades after they drew lots over all 3 realms, sky, sea and the underworld. But Hecate is also the Pameter, mother of all, protector of mothers, and so her ears are tuned to everyone. She too heard Persephone scream from deep within her cave. Together they went to the god Helios, who sees all from the sky, and Demeter stood in front of his son's chariot, and she pleaded with him to tell her the truth. The truth. Well, the truth was worse than anything Demeter could have imagined. It was her brother, Hades, that had snatched Persephone. What's more, it was with the permission of Zeus, Persephone's father. A deal had been done. The contract was sealed. She belonged to her dark husband now. Demeter was beside herself. Helios tried to comfort her. Hades was a great son-in-law, ruler of an entire realm, important, handsome, gentle, and fair-minded. He was a great catch. But this only seemed to make Demeter angrier. How can she agree to her beloved daughter spending eternity in the shadow realm? In what universe was that a great match? No, they knew she would never have consented. This is why they plotted all this behind her back. She swore to make them all pay and walked away. She pulled the shawl over her head and twisted her body and face to those of an old woman. She felt hollow and gnarled inside, and now her physical appearance matched it. She walked the land of the living, and when she came to a place called Eleusis, or Elefsina, on the coast west of Athens, she stopped to rest by the Parthenion, the well of virgins, under the shade of an old olive tree. Just then the daughters of Keleos, the local ruler, Kalithoi, Kalidiki, Klisidiki, and young Demo came to get water in bronze jars. And because Greeks have great regard for those of an advanced age, they saw the old woman looking miserable and vacant, and they asked whether they could help. Demeter gave her name as Doiso, and told a lie. She was from Crete, had been abducted by pirates and made to work like a slave, but she escaped, ended up there in Eleusis. So beloved was this kind of story by gods wishing not to rouse suspicion, that it has a name, the Cretan Lie, because, you see, back then she may as well have said Australia, that's how far Crete was from the mainland. She wished them all good husbands and many children to please their parents, and asked them to keep an ear out for any respectable family looking for a governess. And the girls at once said that their mother, Metaneira, had given birth to a baby brother and was looking for a nursemaid. They took the goddess to the palace to meet the lady of the house. Metaneira offered her the infant, Demophon. "He is late born," she said, "and sickly. Did not expect the gods would grant her a child at her age, and she fears for the boy's health." Demeter promised to look after the child and reassured her that everything would be well. And she took all that pain, all that frustrated devotion, that motherly grief, and poured it into that baby boy. Unbeknown to everyone, she would rub the child with ambrosia, the food of the gods, every night, and put him in the fire like a log under the coals to make him into an immortal. And the boy grew not just healthy, but luminous and stronger than most children 3 times his age. But one night Metaneira caught Demeter putting the child in the hearth, and overwhelmed by panic cried, "My child, what are you doing?" Grabbed the boy and scolded the goddess. At once Demeter grew 10 feet tall, her head touching the palace chamber's ceiling, and drew back her veil, letting her eternal beauty show, her golden tresses shining, her eyes iridescent like honey in the sun. At once all knew she was no mortal and fell to their knees, but Demeter was furious, her grief fully revived. "Ignorant humans! I am Demeter, the greatest joy for immortals and mortals alike. I swear by the implacable water of the Styx, immortal and ageless, I would have made your stupid little boy. But you are too pathetic to recognize the difference between a great future and a common one. Since you did not trust me, then you will worship me instead. You will gather every person in this city to build me the greatest temple over Eleusis. You will offer daily tribute, and in return I will teach those worthy among you the mysteries of life and death." Within days a great temple had been built, and the goddess withdrew into it, her grief not just renewed but multiplied, for having already lost any trust she had for her divine family, she had now lost any love she had for humans. A terrible age followed, perpetual winter. A merciless frozen drought swept over all creation, turning the world into a tundra. Nothing could grow and nothing could be born. No human or animal would know conception. Any seed that tried to germinate, Demeter would trample it with a flick of her heel. Any flower that tried to bloom, she would crush it with a blink of her eye. Any fruit that attempted to fatten itself was blighted with black rot. A great famine swept the world of humans, and the gods became very worried, because they received no sacrifice, no smoke of burning tribute, no sponde of wine, no prayer. Great men and gods alike beseeched Demeter, goddess of plenty, give a little, but she would not listen. All would feel the pain she felt. Then Zeus sent Iris to Demeter to invite her to Olympus so they could put the past behind them and be family again. She sent Iris back to the wielder of lightning with one word: never. Finally Zeus sent Hermes himself to sue for peace, whose tongue could make a drowning man give up his arms in exchange for an anchor. Her terms were simple: the return of her daughter Persephone. Extravagant offers were made, arguments logical and good, threats of torment, appeals to her compassion, but her price remained undiscounted: Persephone. Finally, Hermes descended to the underworld and explained the situation to Hades. The Dark Lord protested, but he knew Zeus's mind was made up. There was no other way out. Without Persephone, all of humankind would perish, and their gods with them. For what are gods with no one to believe in them but faded figures on cracked pottery? When Hades told his queen, Persephone, that she was free, so overjoyed was she that, having refused all food and drink in the world of shadows, since food and drink will bind one to a place, she forgot herself and consumed a single ruby seed from a pomegranate that he cunningly held out as a gift before Hermes led her back to the world of light and to the temple of Eleusis. And so they climbed the Acropolis over Eleusis, and when they made it to the temple, there are no words to describe the joy mother and daughter felt when they saw each other. They ran and fell into each other's arms like two stags' antlers locking in battle, like a tsunami smashing into land. Fields burst with 5-foot-high rows of wheat and barley in the warm sun. Trees blossomed and blossoms turned to fruit in minutes. Apiaries became pools of golden honey. Olive tree branches were so burdened they would bend to deposit their shiny black annuity and bounce back to make more. Pheasant chicks, kid goats and bouncing leverets streaked across the countryside. The sea teemed with fry. Sacrifices were made to thank the gods, especially Demeter, and great feasts were organized. Finally, when tears had run dry and hands had done all the squeezing they needed, Demeter asked Persephone if she had consumed anything in the underworld. It was only then that, rewinding this whirl in her mind, the daughter remembered the pomegranate. For this, Zeus decreed that Persephone must spend 1/3 of every year below with her husband, while Demeter rests in remembrance of her profound grief. This we mortals know as winter, and it is the price we all still pay for one pomegranate seed. After the break, we will unpack the violent erotic symbolism in the myth and speak to expert voices to try and glean how it might all relate to motherly love.
Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing, it's precision-crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision-crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses. I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Now, before we embark on this journey, let us first acknowledge the extent to which religious notions of heaven and hell influence how we see this myth. Above is good, below is bad, above is light, below is dark. Hades is evil, he brings death. Nothing could be further from the truth. Hades is effectively the administrator of a necessary repository of souls. He is a gentle and honourable god, and could not be further from notions of the devil. The primary source for this story remains the 2,800-year-old Homeric hymn to Demeter. One of the things we find out in it is that Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots for the three divine realms, as the Greeks saw them: Olympus, or the heavens, the sea, and the underworld. So the three of them are effectively interchangeable. There is nothing in Hades' temperament or moral character that makes him suited to the underworld, and the realm itself is neither good nor bad, but entirely neutral, a necessary counterpoint to the world of the living. I spoke to archaeologist Alexandra Angeletaki-Røe.
The Homeric hymn to Demeter, dated at the end of the 7th century, refers to the three domains divided between the three main male gods, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. However, the primary goddess of nature, who was Mother Earth and the control of all life through nature, remains Demeter. Demeter, the word itself, comes from Da, which is an early version of Ga, which means Gaia, earth, and Meter, which means mother. And in archaeological excavations throughout Greece, we have had many of these sanctuaries that were given to the male gods in later times seem to be established much earlier, a long time before the Olympian gods are taking over. So we see that in Delos with Artemis before Apollo, in Delphi with Gaia, in Olympia with Hera before she became the jealous wife of Zeus. And these are omnipotent nature goddesses. I believe that this reflects a memory of the power women held in early societies, a power that has diminished due to male dominance through a transition from matriarchy to patriarchy. So the hymn to Demeter illustrates her struggle to assert her female power and dominion over agriculture and nature in a world that is increasingly governed by male deities.
This isn't some battle between good and evil, then. It is a political struggle. This takes a big shift. Religious fingerprints are all over most recent conceptions of the myth. The Goddess of Spring is a very early Disney 9-minute colour animation from 1934 that tells the story of Persephone. Hades bursts through the earth in flames, accompanied by black imps carrying pitchforks, and drags Persephone to hell, where, incidentally, they play jazz. Ooh. Not only is he conflated with the devil, he's a stage version of the devil, quite literally in costume, complete with horns, a cape, red tights and pointy shoes, as if in a production of Faust.
Maidens, I've chosen you to be queen of my kingdom below.
No, I will not go.
No! The second issue that we have to sidestep is, and there is no delicate way of putting this, the rampant incest. As we will find out when we come to talk about Oedipus, incestuous relationships among humans were taboo, but for gods they were common and numerous. This is the case with most Genesis myths. In almost any religion and any attempt to chart creation, you often start with a pair. Whether they are Cronus and Rhea or Adam and Eve, incest is plainly a necessity. A man has only so many ribs. That doesn't mean one cannot acknowledge the fact that Zeus is Persephone's father and also her uncle, or that Hades is Demeter's brother and son-in-law. It is, of course, significant. We just have to see past the moral judgment that would rightly attach to these things outside a creation myth context in order to analyse their highly sexual content with a clear eye. I talked to cultural historian Debbie Challis.
This is her uncle who's abducting her. I mean, this is the Olympians, so they're all kind of, incest doesn't really matter to them. But this is her uncle, so there's a generational gap. This abduction, it's not just about the violence, it's also about the kind of fact that it's her uncle doing this, somebody she might normally trust. And it's interesting because Ovid comes back to this again in his Fasti, which is basically a book of days, if you like. It's all the sort of Roman days, the meaning they have. So in book 4, which is April, so it's spring, and April the 12th, there's the Games of Ceres, and this is obviously all to welcome in spring. There's a focus on the meadows, but there's a sensuality about what Persephone Proserpine is doing. And I remember I translated this for my Latin GCSE, this is one of my texts, and I remember translating it, all these flowers, the way that the rhythm worked, the kind of ebbing and flowing into each other. There was a sensuality about it. And they're picking all these flowers, the amorous meanings. And again, she tears her robe and the maidens find themselves, there's something, it says pectora nuda manu. And it's basically, they're basically beating their naked breasts. They tear their clothes and they beat their naked breasts. He tells it very sensually, but it's not focusing on the love. The love is that of the Lord of Underworld, not on Persephone herself, not on her desires. It's not about what Persephone wants, and certainly not what Demeter or Charis wants.
So familial relationships are important, but because they involve a betrayal of trust by men who should be more considerate of the women here, who are not mortals, they're not strangers. This is his sister and his daughter. It is this going over Demeter's and Persephone's heads that is the immoral part of the story. The other instantly notable feature is that the myth exists in various formats across a myriad cultures, with some striking similarities between peoples who would have had no cultural contact with each other for millennia. This is either then a myth with very ancient roots, or it has developed in similar ways for reasons we're not clear about. At any given time, there were many phonetic variants of Persephone's name around in the Hellenic world. Persephone, Persephonia, Persephassa, Persephata, Ferofata, Ferepapha, Ferepapha, Persephona, Piriphona, and Persephassa. Philologist Martin Nilsson posits that this hints at difficulty pronouncing a name that isn't Greek, that predates the Greek language. The myth really is universal. The Acoma tribe, for instance, in central New Mexico, has an ancient legend about Cochin-Nenako, the daughter of an Acoma chief who married Shakok, the spirit of winter. But when he came to live with him, the seasons grew colder, the snow and ice became permanent, the corn would no longer mature, and the Acoma people had to live on cactus leaves. One day when Cochin was foraging, she meets Mayochin. He falls in love with her and gives her a bounty of food for the whole tribe. She doesn't know that he is the spirit of summer, Shakok's mortal enemy. They become locked in battle for her love, but it is a destructive stalemate and her people suffer. The world suffers. So in the end she agrees to live with each for half the year. In the Ramayana, Ravana, a demon king, kidnaps Sita and holds her captive. Hel, in Norse mythology, is the queen of the underworld, and she snatches King Digva, who should be going to Valhalla, to her realm instead, to make him her concubine. The Mesopotamian myth of Inanna and Ishtar shares characteristics. Equivalent tales pop up everywhere, from the folk tradition of the Sami people to Celtic myths. Food is often a part of it. Food and memory are intimately connected after all. Scent and taste are powerful triggers. I have not truly returned home until I have tousled the lemon pelargonium, mint and basil in the terracotta pots as I climbed the stairs to my mother's door and smelled my hand. Marcel Proust is triggered into a book's worth of repressed memories by a simple Madeleine. Sometimes the memory of food cannot even be retraced, as Taffy Brodesser-Ackner observes when she tastes the perfect soup of her youth decades later to find it just meh. In the Japanese Shinto creation myth, when Izanagi descends to the underworld, Yomi, to retrieve his beloved Izanami, the reason she can never return is that she has eaten from the fruit of the dead and is now bound to the underworld. The forbidden fruit in paradise, by the way, is described in Genesis simply as peri, a Hebrew word that just means fruit. Many scholars believe it is a pomegranate. It wouldn't surprise me, in all honesty. Knowledge always demands effort, and pomegranates are a bit of a project. It is the Romans who concentrate much more on the abduction, rather than the abundant richness all around it, and this has persisted. It is such a loaded moment for male artists to turn the trembling hand to. But also, it is dynamic, a moment of movement, action, flesh and possibility. And it's no wonder that most base it on the Ovid version of the myth, the pervert's pervert.
The reason this is the one that is the myth that's probably the most well known is because it's the one that tends to be used in art, particularly in the sort of late Renaissance, going into Baroque period. Probably one of the most famous depictions of it is by Bernini, called The Rape of Proserpina, which was done in 1621-2, which is it's on display in the Galleria Borghese. And I saw it really recently when I was in Rome. And the thing about seeing it, and it's either in the same room or the next room, there is also the Apollo Daphne statue, is it's so violent in terms of in the sculpture. I mean, to the point where you look at her legs and Hades' Dis is, pressing his hands into her thigh. So the thigh is actually sort of being squeezed. And I had this really visceral reaction to it, actually, looking at it. And that I remembered the GCSE text, the Latin, and the sensuality of her picking the flowers in the meadow with all her maiden friends and then being taken. And then I look at this statue and I think, oh my God, that's the reality of the male violence. That's the violence. And it's there as art. So another famous version, about almost exactly the same time as the Bernini, is Rubens's Rape of Proserpine, which again shows, a very fleshy Rubenesque figure, as you'd expect. Basically, her naked, she doesn't even have any clothes on, she just has a little bit covering her bottom. And you can see that, basically Hades is trying to carry her off. There's Cupids around, she's in despair, and the maidens are sort of rather half-heartedly trying to get her back. And I think it's interesting that this is about, this time, 1620s, and through the 17th century, you do get these depictions of the male violence.
By this point, the story is a game of Chinese whispers, with each participant accommodating their own fantasies of domination and female ideals. There are plenty of myths which do involve sexual violence. Later in the season, we will look at Cassandra, for example. But this isn't one of them. The word that has come to mean rape in Greek, precisely as in the Latin root, actually just means taken against one's will, abducted. There is no mention of sex, no pregnancy, no child, and frankly, Hades doesn't seem that kind of guy. This is something to which we will return in the second part next week. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean it's not real trauma. Being taken from a world of light and fecundity, a world of women, into a world of men, a world of shadows, is, of course, traumatic. So as we look for the shards of universal truth, the kernels of human experience that make these myths so compelling thousands of years later, it is important to know how trauma impacts a person. I spoke to psychotherapist Dr. Ruth Smith.
So in trauma therapy, we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And in working with survivors of domestic abuse, coercive control and sexual violence, what can often confuse the survivor victim, and oftentimes their families around them, is how that individual can still have an emotional attachment to the person that's hurt them. And we actually refer to this as trauma bonding. So that is a sort of a psychological attachment that forms in relationships, in abusive relationships. And the bond develops when a person experiences sort of intermittent, rare, positive reinforcement, so it could be their abuser makes them a cup of tea or buys them a present or apologises for their behaviour, and the relief that comes with that, those acts of kindness kind of bond you and make you dependent upon the abuser. Sometimes people get confused between trauma bonding and Stockholm Syndrome. So Stockholm Syndrome was something that was identified in 1973 in Sweden, where hostages of a robbery became bonded to their captors. However, it's not a recognised diagnosable term in psychology, so we actually prefer to use trauma bonding, but they essentially mean a complicated emotional attachment has been formed, a mixture of positive and negative feelings towards the person that is potentially harming you.
Francesco Sacrati was, by all accounts, a talented composer and important Baroque musician from Modena. His La Finta Pazza was the first ever opera to be performed in France, and scholars believe he is responsible for significant sections of Monteverdi's L'Incoronazione di Poppea, on which the old composer collaborated with several young protégés. Very little of Sacrati's work, in fact, survives, but a few fragments of his Proserpina Rapita were included in Antonio Cesti's pastiche work, and when we say pastiche in opera, we mean a review show, essentially, like a showcase, a variety that includes lots of different pieces of other popular works, often brought under one umbrella concept. So we have a few fragments of his Proserpina Rapita in Antonio Cesti's Il Pomodoro. And the reason I include it is because I don't think a single other artist on any medium has captured possibly the most fundamental element of Persephone's trauma quite so perfectly as in this lament. And where does one go? The place is full of grieving souls. Who will listen to my weeping and sighing? Here you hear nothing else. This is the heart of Persephone's difficulty. It's not just that she's suddenly made to mature, from girl to woman, from single to married, from the world she knew to another. It is that she must do it away from any support network, entirely isolated, in a world where none of her old life can ease the transition, in a realm that her mother cannot penetrate, even to give advice or comfort. This version of Persephone is innocent, lost, still in transition, which makes her all the more tragic, of course. A girl used to being surrounded by flowers, by spring, by life, entombed in a cold, dark place where nothing grows.
Proserpine and Persephone is very much associated with seasons. I mean, that's the whole story of the myth. For there has to be darkness, death, winter, for there to be spring, summer, life. And particularly within that, with flowers, there's different versions of what flower she picks. Sometimes in Ovid's Metamorphoses, it's a crocus, which symbolises spring and new beginnings, but then sometimes it's a narcissus. And then Demeter is very much associated with poppies because the gods give her a draught of poppy juice to make her sleep and stop her being in anguish. And after that, she said in her footsteps to spring poppies. And of course, poppies are associated with sleep and with death because they're often found in places, even in the ancient world, it was noted that they would often grow on battlegrounds because they grow from bodies. And there is a separate flower goddess, Flora, in the Roman world too. And you get them sometimes her confused with that Roman goddess. But in the Victorian period, in terms of art, that's how she's generally depicted, not with a pomegranate, actually, but it's more within flowers, within a meadow.
A meadow is, of course, itself a liminal space, not quite the forest, but neither the safety of a field, not entirely private, but secluded, not quite dark, but hazy, a dangerous place for a girl curious about unusual plants jutting out, growing, a place of transition, but from what to what? This is how the hymn to Demeter actually describes the Narcissus trap. She was filled with a sense of wonder, and she reached out with both hands to take hold of the lovely plaything. Of course, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, But this doesn't feel like one of those times.
There's a sculpture by the American artist Hiram Powers called Proserpina, which was, I think the first one was in the 1840s. There's loads of versions of it in American museums. It was replicated more than any other work produced by a studio. There's apparently some, I've read that there's 200 copies. I've also read that there's 300 copies. So you can see various versions of it. And there's a very anodyne depiction of, I saw a version of it at the Russell Coates Museum in Bournemouth, and she's there, she's a bust, but it's not just her neck and shoulders, it's also her full breast as well, with nipples. And it felt a bit like looking at a page 3 girl, I suppose, and that's probably an old reference now, but there's no real fleshiness to it. And yet somehow we're allowed to look at her. Apparently he'd originally meant to do all kinds of flowers around her, but sometimes you find it on a bust of flowers, or flowers are put around her. So this kind of idea of her maidenhood, her womanly beauty being attached to meadows and to flowers is a very 19th century one. And you see it in Walter Crane's picture of her, the face of Persephone, and Hades comes out of the ground. Slightly later, you've got John William Waterhouse and there's girls picking flowers around her. Again, it's this idea of virginity, of maidenhood, not quite getting the full picture. Somehow like, tearing their clothes off their breasts, that we can all look at them picking flowers in a meadow.
And so it seems clear that even her elevation to sublime victimhood is designed to make her more attractive as a sexual object for other men looking on. It weakens her. But this is not a story about weakness. It is a story of strength, a story of women helping women, standing up for each other, a story of an unbreakable loving bond being used as a crowbar to dislodge powerful men from their smug complacency. It is a negotiation. Power changes hands. Demeter and Persephone both start with nothing, with a wall of men saying to both, "It is how it is," and somehow they manage to get what they want for 2/3 of the year, simply by realizing a basic natural truth, that the one thing men cannot do, with all their chariots and lightning bolts, with all their bravado and swagger, is to give life. Demeter effectively goes on a fertility strike. We see a similar realization in Lysistrata, the subject of a future episode for sure. In the iconic MGM musical 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, the eldest of the 7, a sort of proto-MAGA Meninist, gorgeously played by Howard Keel, having recently married, encourages his incel brothers to go out and kidnap the girls they fancy. He tells his brothers the tale of the Sabine women, the Roman myth of the rape of the Sabine women, actually.
Tell you about them Sabine women who lived in the Roman days. It seems that they all went swimming while their men was off to graze. Well, a Roman troop was riding by and saw them in their me oh my, so they took them all back home to dry. At least that's what Plutarch says.
But the plan backfires. The women band together, including his new wife, and throw all the men out of the cabin to winter in some shack, cold, miserable, and very much still relying on manual labor.
Countryside, so don't forget that when you're taking a bride, sobbing fit to be tied.
Women may have been dealt as poor a hand in lawless 1800s frontier America as they did in ancient Greece, as they have done so many times through the centuries, but that hand always contains one killer trump. Without their collective power of renewal, this becomes a dying world. A concept explored with exquisite bleakness in Alfonso Cuarón's 2006 Children of Men. I spoke to film critic Linda Marric.
In Children of Men, the world is similarly barren, but not in terms of seasons, but in terms of human fertility. Women can no longer conceive, leading to societal collapse and existential dread. People are desperate for hope. They are being prescribed death pills, because if there are no babies being born, there is no future for Earth. There is no point in staying alive for it. Key, the pregnant teenage refugee, is a modern Persephone figure. She breaks the cycle of infertility. Her pregnancy represents the return of life and offers hope of renewal, of the possibility of life.
Stop! Cease fire! Cease
Like Persephone, she exists between two realms. Refugees in this world are not regarded as human. They're not regarded as fully fledged citizens of any world. They are packed in these refugee camps. Key is symbolic because she manages by her existence and the existence of her baby to represent women, but also the future, and becomes a savior for all the refugees. But she also saves Theo from his despair. He has lost all hope in life. He doesn't care what happens to him. He doesn't care what happens to anyone around him. Because he's put in charge of her safety, his life changes. He fights to stay alive and fights to keep her alive.
So, regardless of how society tries to rearrange itself, there is one thing it simply cannot exist without: mothers. And here is the paradox of the story of Demeter and Persephone. It also needs those mothers to raise more mothers. Demeter isn't necessarily opposed to marriage. Indeed, as a mortal, she wishes the daughters of Challis good husbands and children, because it is what any parent would want for a daughter, she says. But how to square that with Demeter's resistance to the marriage of her own daughter? There is a critical difference. The separation this particular marriage causes appears permanent. Few can go to the underworld, and fewer still return. Persephone's descent is tantamount to death, and so Demeter's grief is fitting. More than that, the hymn takes her side, relates her emotions with absolute empathy. Being a mother is hell, Rosa says, in what must be opera's angriest prayer, in Francesco Cilea's opera L'Arlesiana. I have known no peace since the day my child was born. You saw me, Lord, those fearful nights by his cradle. You heard me dispute his life with you hour after hour. But does it have to be like this? Or is that concept of all-in motherhood as much mythology as Demeter and Persephone? Does such obsessive worry and complete sacrifice always equal good mother?
So in psychotherapy, we talk about the concept of the good enough mother, which was introduced by British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. And this is a crucial way of understanding child development and maternal love and care and nurturing. And so the idea of a good enough mother is that we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to get everything right 100% of the time. We need 4 key components. That we do allow the child to experience some challenges and some frustrations, but in a very gentle, loving way in order to help them build some sense of resilience. A good enough mother also allows their child to develop some independence. So that means that we help the child transition from needing and wanting and believing that their needs are always going to be met to allow them to be able to tolerate difficult emotions and to foster their autonomy. Simply put, if a mother is too over the top, too domineering or too neglectful, the child can develop what Winnicott called a false self, which is a personality shaped by external expectations. And finally, Winnicott talked about having a holding environment. So this is where a child knows that they have a secure emotional space, where the child feels safe enough to explore their individuality, but they know they're still going to get care and love and support.
Now, if we accept not the wisdom, but the fact that the purpose of a woman in ancient Greece was seen as marriage and motherhood, then she must be taught about marriage and motherhood. The person most suited to this task is the mother. This is the reason the hymn is so sympathetic to Demeter. It serves as a warning to both father and suitor not to disregard the mother-daughter link. If calamity is the result of doing so, even for mighty Zeus and Hades, The lesson is one of moderation in the exercise of patriarchal authority. Key to the survival of that societal model, then, is for the mother to perpetuate the model by teaching it, and then be willing to allow the daughter to take her place as mother-teacher.
So Greta Gerwig's Ladybird is all about growing up and figuring things out for yourself. Saoirse Ronan is 18, about to graduate from high school, and she's applying to all of these universities, and she's a very bright and intelligent young woman, but her mother is refusing to let go of her. Her mother, Marion, is refusing to let go of her. It's not control. Marion, who is Ladybird's mother, loves her daughter so much that she is incapable of letting her go. And she's finding it very hard to reconcile this idea that your kids grow up and leave home and you have to just accept it. It touches on some of the same ideas as the old Persephone myth. Think about it. Ladybird's going through all of these first times and realizing she doesn't know everything. That whole journey of navigating friendships, dating and family stuff, as she tries to break free from her hometown of Sacramento, as her own little underworld, she has to go through to become her own person. It's a film that has a lot of humor in it. It's a film about finding out who you are as a young person and understanding that from now on, as much as your parents love you, you have to make your own decisions. The dad is extremely understanding and a very mellow kind of guy. Her mother is a complete opposite, but not out of nastiness. She's just someone who wants to hold on to her baby for a tiny bit longer.
So that's the model of parenthood, a delicate balance of creating space for an independent person to emerge. Get it wrong one way, and your child feels unsupported and unloved. Get it wrong the other way, and they end up stunted and resenting a level of control that continues to infantilize them. Does Demeter get it right? And remember, this is according to her story. The Homeric hymn to Demeter is effectively an oral tradition advertorial on why her cult really is the best one and you should join it. Isn't it interesting that the hymn describes how Persephone was soothed by hope, as long as the earth and the star-filled sky were still within her view, as also the rays of the sun, that her dear mother and that special group of immortal gods would save her? Didn't Dr. Ruth say that one of the aims of good enough mothering is to defeat an automatic expectation in the child that their needs will somehow be met?
When we look at the role of a positive parental relationship in psychotherapy, especially in relation to the mother, a positive, healthy relationship would look like allowing the child to be their own person. So oftentimes in childhood, we have two distinct phases of separating and becoming our own person. And that's usually when we're a toddler, the phase that people call the terrible twos. And that's when a child learns, I am a separate entity from my mother, and it's usually the mother. And allowing the child to experience that, but having a safe, loving parent to return to is absolutely fundamental in growing up with a healthy psyche. And likewise, that is echoed in the teenage years, that children going through adolescence will often seek to rebel or push boundaries. And again, that's a natural stage of growth, which is, I have this fundamental relationship, but I am my own individual. And a healthy parent-child relationship, within reasons, with boundaries, allows that to happen and for their child to become an individual person.
Of course, one can do everything right and still experience loss. Sometimes the loss is imposed by exigent factors and is mercilessly physical.
So, terms of endearment. Deborah Winger plays Emma, a rebellious young woman, and Shelley MacLaine plays her mother, Aurora. She's overbearing. She thinks she knows it all. She is very critical of Emma's decision to embark into this relationship with someone who she regards as being a bit wet. After a while, Emma decides that she wants to move out of her mother's house. She marries, she leaves Aurora on her own, and Aurora is absolutely devastated. However, she has to accept that her daughter is married and living a different life to her. She's an adult. She must let her go. When Emma becomes seriously ill, she has stage 4 cancer, Aurora must promise Emma that she will look after her children. It's probably one of the most devastating mother-daughter stories, but it's also a film that allows a lot of humor within it. I mean, Emma's journey and Emma's illness almost liberates Aurora from the hurt of being separated from her daughter. When Emma dies, there is this finality about it because Aurora knows she no longer has a daughter. She must go and live her own life.
Is there a sense then that actual death, although vastly and infinitely more traumatic, at least has a shape that can be processed over time, while separation, that feels to the mother as a result of rejection, is a perpetually fresh wound? Is deliberate distance a more hurtful barrier than death because it never fades?
I'm just a woman, a lonely woman, waiting on the weary shore. I'm just a woman that's only human, one you should be sorry for.
The wonderful Rita Dove has written an entire cycle of poems on the themes of Demeter and Persephone.
Ain't these tears in these eyes telling you, am I blue? Why, you'd be too.
The Bistro Styx ends with these shattering lines. But are you happy? Fearing, I whispered it quickly. What? You know, Mother, she bit into the starry rose of a fig. One really should try the fruit here. I've lost her, I thought, and called for the bill.
Oh, didn't I used to be gay? Oh, till today. Down and with true love am I blue.
When I started researching this telling of the tale, all about a pure, unbreakable, living bond between mother and daughter, I came upon something so glaring, so peculiar, so startling, it felt strange not to have noticed it before. I will share it with you after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
So, having established how important and strong the unconditionally loving mother-daughter relationship is, strong enough to bend the male gods to its will, I looked for it in modern storytelling, only to find that, quite frankly, it isn't there. I don't mean modern feminist literature or a Netflix series from the last year. I mean, I guess, the canon. I could name 10 Verdi operas off the top of my head which open with the tale of the heroine's mother dying to emphasize how doting the father is. I could rattle off a list of classic plays all about the unbreakable bond between father and son. Films, the gleaming core of which is the eternal devotion between mother and son. They're a dime a dozen. But when it comes to mothers and daughters, in literature, drama, music, cinema, dysfunction and rivalry seem easier to sell. The best mother is a dead mother appears to be the golden rule here. Unless the mother is a total bitch, that's even better. I'm looking at you, Clytemnestra. You're on my naughty list for season 2. Well, of course, I thought. It's men writing all these stories. Men cannot conceive of a universe that does not orbit our penis like some obscene planetarium. We think when we go to sleep, everyone takes down the set and has a cuppa in a Garibaldi. So I looked at classics with a female storyteller. Broadly the same pattern. Even in the examples I have cited, the relationship is prickly, critical, volatile. Love has to be hard-earned. Sure, there are plenty of putrid paters in stories out there. Some mama's boys sure could use a couple of sessions a week on the couch. Oedipus, please take your place in the queue behind Clytemnestra. There are mother figures, maternal big sisters, fairy godmothers and the like. Even the few examples I landed on, Little Women, the Joy Luck Club, Gilmore Girls, seem to confirm the void by virtue of their rarity. An exception to this rule is Amilcare Ponchielli's opera La Gioconda. The eponymous heroine adores and cares for her mother who is blind. They share one of only a handful loving mother-daughter duets, a duettino really, in non-obscure opera. Gioconda has just discovered the man she loves has betrayed her. Lean on me, my daughter, the old woman says, in a reversal of the roles. We will combine our two sorrows into one. But even in La Gioconda, her love for her mother becomes her kryptonite. She sacrifices both her love and ultimately her life to save her mother, not knowing that she has already been killed. Death seems to stalk motherhood, especially before modern medicine. It was the risk one took. Whenever a woman produces this tiny, helpless, squishy, vulnerable thing, you consign yourself to precisely what Rosa described in L'Arlesiana, an hour-by-hour negotiation with the universe, a constant plea for mercy. Nobody understood this better than Mary Shelley.
Mary Shelley wrote a play in 1820 called Proserpine, and it was published 12 years later in The Winter's Reef. When Shelley obviously she's most associated with Frankenstein, but in this play, she depicts the mother's rage and rebellion against male powers that have bereaved her of her child. Although it's called Proserpine, a lot of it's about Demeter. And rather than the focus on the abduction, the focus is more on the fact that Proserpine gets one over Hades, if you like, and that she manages to come out for 6 months. So it's a focus on the mother-daughter love. Mary Shelley herself, she lost so many children. I don't know how she bore it. She had miscarriages, she lost many in infancy, so she had one son remaining. You know, she's writing about the grief of bereavement. Part of the reason she writes Frankenstein is out of that. She's reflecting on the birth and death and mother love, bearing in mind that she was part of a group that espoused free love, or rather, perhaps their husbands did. She places motherly, maternal love and child love, particularly love of a daughter, which is interesting, bearing in mind she had a remaining son, above sexual love. Proserpine, you know, she has a regard for Hades, actually, but she wants to be with her mother. And it's seen as that they've got one over on the gods and the men by actually being able to be together 6 months of the year. So towards the end of the play, Proserpine proclaims a triumph of love between mother and daughter. She says, 6 months together we shall dwell on earth, 6 months in dreams we shall companions be. She is joined with her mother in dreams. And you cannot break that love, no matter what you do, even if they die. The mother will still grieve for them and be joined to them somehow. So Shelley's reflecting on her own experience as a woman, as a mother who's lost children and still has at least one living. You know, you don't ever get over it. You're still grieving for them, but you know you're joined to them. They're part of you.
Remember the discussion of mourners in the Orpheus episode? Only women are seen as naturally able to express grief on a grand scale. Is this how Demeter and Persephone, this duo of vitality, end up custodians of the secrets of death? Are the givers of life the only ones who can truly understand the pain of its being extinguished? This precise idea forms the principal thesis of the classic 1989 tearjerker Steel Magnolias, a film all about motherhood and solidarity among a group of Southern women. Shelby, played by Julia Roberts, decides to have a baby, even though it's a huge risk because of her severe diabetes. The child is healthy, but both Shelby's kidneys fail. Her mother, Melin, donates one of hers, but the transplant is not a success and Shelby dies. Melin describes the moment her daughter passed away and explains why only a mother could experience that holiness.
And finally, we realized there was no hope. We turned off the machines. Drum left, he couldn't take it. Jackson left. I find it amusing. Men are supposed to be made out of steel or something. I just sat there. I couldn't leave my Shelby. There was no noise, no tremble. Oh, God. I realize, as a woman, how lucky I am. I was there when that wonderful creature drifted into my life. And I was there when she drifted out. I gotta get back.
That is the crux of it. In order to feel the full negative space that death leaves and grief pours into, in order to be able to see both Rubens' vase and the trick image it creates, one must understand the other side of that equation.
The eminent classicist Jane Harrison was one of the so-called Cambridge ritualists, as in wrote about the ritual and the importance of this to Greece, and again applied material culture to that, so would look at vases and things. She wrote that in Eleusis, the marriage and birth go together, that you had a union with the divine through these mysteries, through this kind of ceremony that you took part in, and that would, in a Christian sense, save your soul, but in another sense, maybe make you not so scared of death. This comes up again in H.D., American poet Hilda Doolittle, who moved to London at the beginning of the 20th century. And she was very influenced by Greek myth and writing and part of the so-called imagist movement of like snatches of poetry. And she returns to the myth of Demeter and Persephone again and again. I mean, she writes a poem called Demeter in 1917, Cora and Cara in 1930, and then in Helen in Egypt, she actually says, I am Cora Persephone. But it's this idea that women in particular could have a union with the divine or the feminine, not always women, but certainly you had to combine the idea of birth and death and marriage, uniting all of that. And so somehow you had greater access to the divine.
Persephone does not simply come back to light and life, but her death and rebirth is somehow regularized. It doesn't happen once through some feat or ruse. It is not the granting of a boon. It will happen annually. The veil between those two realms is for the first time permeable both ways. Her ascent from the underworld is a genuine game changer in terms of people's metaphysical beliefs.
The ability Persephone has to break her bond with Hades and return to Earth symbolizes the cycle of death and rebirth. And that way, it offers hope to humans. Her descent into the underworld represents the possibility of an eventual return and signifies renewal and life after death. Persephone's return offers not only a cosmic reassurance of life's seasonal renewal, but also a promise that the soul could transcend death, that there was a potential for regeneration. This myth was especially powerful for ancient Greeks and gave rise to a belief that death was not final.
This moment changes everything. From here on in, the writings of Aristotle, Plato, Plutarch engage with this question possibly more than any other. What is the essence of a person? And if it is contained in this thing called a soul, the very soul that walks the underworld forever, then is the person really dead? Or is death merely a transition? And if our soul is preserved, and Persephone can be reborn every spring, why not others deemed worthy?
There is an interesting group of vases that were found at excavations in Rhenia, which is the island close to Delos, in the middle of the Aegean Sea, right in the middle of the Cycladic Islands. And these vases go back to the 6th century. They're called the Milian type of vases, probably of Parian origin, but they carry always on the neck a figure of a young maiden that has often an earring or some kind of jewelry hanging around her neck. And that could be connected to Persephone as the goddess of the underworld, because it's found in most of the vases. That could be this deity that helps people carry that hope for the crossing of the soul to the other world.
I'm looking at those Rhenian findings right now. They look so peculiar, so odd to put the largest image of those jugs on their narrowest point where it doesn't fit. It looks crowded. It's so unlike those accomplished artisans, unless there was a reason. Just for fun, I note that water is the only medium that crosses all realms. It is the entrance to the underworld. It is the thing that carries souls. How fitting, then, that the neck of those funeral pitchers should be embraced by the facilitator of that journey from the visible top to the dark depth of those vases. Not only did Persephone from that moment on embody hope for mortals of something more, but she and her mother, as promised by Demeter, would teach the mortals to understand the cycle better, take some of the dread of death away by showing a glimpse of the world beyond. Mother and daughter initiated the first members, and they passed on the secret generation to generation. They did this through the Eleusinian mysteries, which marked the Chori's return to the underworld each autumn, a secret cult mysteries, the aim of which was to demystify.
The Eleusinian mysteries as well were deeply tied to this belief and carried this hope. So the mystes, the ones initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries, would have to safeguard the secret of the mysteries. They participated in sacred rituals, and they could thus gain access to this divine knowledge of the afterlife. That way, they could secure a better existence after death, much like Persephone's own return to the earth each year. Thus, Persephone's myth and her connection to the cyclical nature of life and death became an enduring symbol of immortality for ancient Greeks.
And of course, those Westerners addicted to the tales of ancient Greece would struggle to apply rationalism to ritualism, because even on the most practical level, very little is known about what actually went on behind the closed doors of the Mystae.
In the mid-19th century, there was an added interest into the Eleusinian mysteries. There was a growing sense that the Greeks weren't the kind of rationalist, Apollo kind of enlightenment style of gods of the romantic. And there's a influential history of Greece by George Grote, which talks about this Olympic rationalism, but also brought in these mystery cults. And Eleusis was one of the main ones that they focused on. I mean, one of the most famous poems in the 19th century about Proserpine is this Hymn to Proserpine by Algernon Swinburne. I think it's really interesting that he sets it. He doesn't just write a hymn to Proserpine. It's not a version of the Homeric hymn. He sets it after the proclamation in Rome of the Christian faith. And it's like a goodbye to paganism and the idea of the afterlife in the pagan world. And kind of this idea that pale Galilean, the world has grown grey from thy breath, that somehow Christianity comes in, brings the colour down. Bearing in mind this is, famously published in Poems and Ballads, which had a lot of criticism, partly because of its sexual imagery, but also because of poems like this that were critical, if you like, of Christian faith, but critical coming after evolution when there's, doubts being actively expressed. And I just think it's a really important way of thinking about the mysteries. The last sentence is, "For there is no God found stronger than death, and death is asleep," which is this idea that somehow in the Eleusis mysteries, in the story of Demeter and Persephone, that you not just lose the fear of death, it was a kind of form of eternal life. And I mean, he's not the only one writing about this. Tennyson writes a much more traditional kind of, but an idea of Demeter as an earth goddess not long after. This fascination with ritual, a lot more scenes of Bacchantes, of danger, of dancing and poetry, and music, when you get Nietzsche influencing Wagner. This idea that dancing, and particularly women dancing, and that, you know, you didn't always know what was going on.
Incorporation, actually, may not be very hard. There are stunning parallels between Persephone and the Virgin Mary, especially in the Greek Orthodox and Catholic traditions. One of the most common epithets for Persephone is Despina. The same is true of the Madonna in Greece, especially to distinguish her form after Dormition and Ascension in the case of Eastern Christians, or Assumption for Catholics. Whatever the fineries of dogma, the net result is the same in both traditions. Mary ends up Queen of the Heaven, or enthroned, not quite divine, but the highest created being, a process helped along by several long-reigning female monarchs throughout Europe at key periods, especially England and Spain. Angela de Acevedo's 1640s play, The Joys and Misfortunes of the Game and Devotion of the Virgin, for example, crafts a sort of matriarchy in heaven and champions a pointedly strong maternal role for the Virgin, intended to bolster, maybe, the power of the Queen? Deployment of a sort of hybrid Madonna Earth Goddess figure, the latter being so universal in every culture, was also a key feature in the proselytizing and converting indigenous populations to Christianity. It's no coincidence that Marian worship is much more prominent in South and Central America, and its rituals retain overtly pagan features, as they also do in Greece, incidentally. Long processions of icons or holy relics, especially around the August feast of Dormition, from one church to another, where they live for a portion of the year, before another feast and a procession the other way. Mexico's golden age poet, playwright, and coolest nun ever, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, composed many, many Marian villancicos. They're like carols for various feasts in the Aztec language, Nahuatl. For the Feast of Assumption, for example, "Beloved Lady, since you're departing, O Mother, please do not forget us." These parallels with Mary actually shed light the other way too, on an aspect of the Persephone myth, on which I had not quite been able to put my finger. Mary comprises three almost entirely separate entities, even celebrated on different days, at least in Greece. The young virgin, then the mother, then in heaven enthroned. Now Persephone has a similar triptych. The young virgin, then part of the year the daughter, and part of the year in the underworld, enthroned. And it is that last aspect of them, enthroned, that is very striking. When Orthodox or Catholic Christians pray for mercy, or a favour, or understanding, they pray to Mary as a conduit. They ask her to ask God. She represents compassion, mercy, empathy. She is, after all, the only one at the top table who knows what it is like to be human, to feel pain or fear or grief. She is humanity's ambassador in heaven. And so it is, precisely so, with Persephone. This is why she becomes such a pivotal figure in antiquity, practically eclipses Hades. This is why the mother-daughter cult and the Eleusinian mysteries were the most highly respected. This is why her return basically altered theology and how the Greeks thought about life and death. She's utterly unique, with knowledge and influence over both chiaro ed oscuro, humanity's ambassador in the most frightening of all countries. The ancient poetess Sappho opens an unusually short poem, a reflection maybe of how sudden the death was, with "This dust was Timas," as if to shock the audience with such finality. The poem is about a young girl called Timas who goes to sleep the night before her wedding and wakes up in Persephone's dark palace. And although the juxtaposition is intended to be sad, to seem unfair, I cannot help but think, what's the alternative? For that young girl to be in the land of the dead without someone who understands how you feel and can comfort you. So I go forward 2,500 years to a modern Sappho, Edna St. Vincent Millay, and her prayer to Persephone. I think she has it right. She's writing about a fellow Vassar student who had died. She prays, "Be to her, Persephone, all the things I might not be. Take her head upon your knee. Say to her, my dear, it is not so dreadful here." Next week we get the missing pieces of the story from Persephone, and maybe drop a few comforting pro-mama assumptions to pull at some loose threads, like "I'm such a great mother that I starved all humanity and threatened genocide unless I got my way." That doesn't seem very proportionate, does it?
For it's a long, long while from May to December. But the days
This is the counterpoint of the Persephone myth that is so often overlooked. We are so focused on what she brings to us in the above. Spring, warmth, fertility, variety, abundance, cheese and figs and the mysteries of the great beyond. We forget what she takes to them below.
turns the leaves to flame. One hasn't got time.
She brings light and hope to a world of ink-black resignation. She brings memory to a realm of forgetting, the compassion of sharpness to the executioner's axe, and maybe a few extra moments to a final reel that always, always runs out too soon.
September.
And all of this we got for the measly price of one pomegranate seed.
And these few precious days I'll spend with you. These golden days.
So I leave you with some more Rita Dove and a perfect final 3 lines from her poem Canary, written not about Persephone, but another captive of the darkness, Billie Holiday.
And these few precious days I'll spend with you.
Fact is, the invention of women under siege has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. If you can't be free, be a mystery.
September.
Podyssey is an audio production by Cooler Heads, written and presented by Alex Andreou. A playlist of all the music in the episode, as well as links to the films and works of art mentioned, can be found in the show notes. Creative input, sage advice and expert contributions by the four best muses a man could ask for: Alexandra, Angeletaki-Røe, Debbie Challis, Linda Marric and Dr. Ruth Smith. Executive producers Naomi Smith and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canello. Alex Andreou's Podyssey is a collaboration with Soundstone Global.